Okay, I'd like to start by introducing the first speaker of our program for today, David Stetzer. Before I get into the introduction that Ruth's written for me, I just want to let people know dirty electricity is a subject we've covered, I think, 2 or 3 times in Nexus magazine. We had Donna Fisher speaking here in the same time slot last year, and that absolutely stunned the audience. People were very excited and concerned to hear the information. We also did an article in Nexus, I think about 10 years ago, where we mentioned the concept of dirty electricity, where farms in America were finding that their animals were getting sick and giving lower yields of milk in the dairies. And to cut a long story short, they discovered that electricity was running around, coming up through into the infrastructure, and it was radiating the cows and was affecting their performance. So I'm very pleased to see that the subject has been picked up and taken on. And today we've got literally the world's expert on the topic who's come out to Australia. I think he's going to be in Australia for a while doing some other presentations. There's a big stall out there from the people who represent his activity here in Australia, so make yourself available to those. So David Stetzer, he's from Wisconsin, USA. He's received his initial training in the US Air Force back in the 1970s. He held a top secret clearance with crypto access. He's a member of the Institute of Electric and Electrical Engineers. That's the IEEE, very prestigious body. These days he has his own electronics and consulting companies. He's actively involved with EMF and EMR research. That's electromagnetic field and electromagnetic radiation research in Australia. He's involved in research in Canada, Japan, Kazakhstan, Russia, as well as the USA. His website's pretty much what's the email address there. It's stetzerelectric.com, but as you can see, he's got a stall there. David has produced several documentaries, including Beyond Coincidence, The Perils of Electrical Pollution, and another one called The Effects of Low-Level Nonlinear Voltage Applied to Cows. There you go. He's authored specific papers. It's probably your research that we were touching on in the magazine all those years ago without realising it. Anyway, he's co-authored specific papers that have been presented at conferences around the world, including at the World Health Organization. He's a co-inventor with Professor Martin Graham of the microsurge meter, which measures high-frequency pollution or dirty electricity. So basically there's a device out there now which measures dirty electricity. Dirty electricity is now measured in GS units. The G is Dr. Graham and the S is David Stetzer. So he's gone down in history along with Gauss and Tesla and other famous people who've had a unit of stuff named after them. I was trying to find the right word, sorry. So that's what I've got here. Please give Mr. David Stetzer a big warm welcome to Australia and to our Nexus conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. If I stumble through this, like as Duncan said, I have presented papers and things all over the world, and but I got a letter here from this morning. I opened the packet, and it says that if you haven't already done so, we suggest that you take some time to familiarize yourself with Nexus. We are not normal. So that kind of set the stage here, so I'm a little more nervous than I should be, probably. You look normal. Okay, what I want to talk about today is dirty electricity. And it isn't something that, doesn't affect anybody in this room. It affects everybody in this room, everybody. So you're all exposed to it. Okay, first of all, where does it come from? What are the effects of dirty electricity on electrical equipment? What are the effects on humans and animals? What has to be done to control it? And what can we do? So where does it come from? Basically, we have 21st century technology, and we have a 19th century distribution system. A little brief history. In 1972, there was an oil embargo, so we had to get more energy efficient. So we had to make equipment that was designed to run efficiently. So we came out with instead of using current in the full sinusoid, which I'll explain in a minute, we started using current in short pulses. So we're turning it on and off. Variable speed frequency drives, HID lighting, dimmer switches, compact computers, TVs, and most other electronic devices are energy efficient devices, including the compact fluorescent lights that we see now. This is a waveform, and you can see this is the voltage. The blue trace is the voltage waveform, and the red trace is the current waveform. So you can see they draw it linear. In other words, when one's maximum positive, so is the other, okay? And so the current is drawn in a continuous fashion, keeps moving. This is a compact fluorescent light. And the voltage, again, is in blue. And there's 3 cycles here. And you can see where we turn it on, the current flows. It's off, on, off, on, off. So this is a nonlinear load. Just an example of it. And so you can see the current is not proportional. Okay, so electrical pollution, power quality. I define it as anything that deviates from the normal sinusoid, and the normal sinusoid is that waveform. So contributors are harmonics, transients, sags, and swells. Swells isn't listed, but so harmonics. Basically, harmonic frequency, that is an integer, a whole number, multiple, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc., of the fundamental frequency. Here in Australia, your fundamental frequency is 50 hertz, so the second harmonic is 100. The fifth harmonic would be 250. So these are currents that are flowing on the line, in addition to the 60 cycle current, or 50 cycle. This is a Gateway laptop computer, and I'm sure some of you have one or have seen them. But this is the current, how it flows. It's on, off, on, off. So then we do a frequency spectrum, and you can see all the electrons are moving at 50 cycles per second, and then this big percentage of them here, almost 90-some%, and it goes on and on and on. And one thing we have to remember, and I'll get into a little later, but anything above 1.7 kilohertz, that energy will dissipate internal to the human body. Transients. Everybody's here old enough to where we had the computers, and power would go off, for example, or your computer fails, and they say, well, it was a spike. Well, this would be an example of a spike that's on the line. Okay, so it causes problems. So those are transients. Sags, probably you've been in a restaurant sometime where the air conditioner turns on and the lights dim for a couple cycles, or something like that. Some furnace kicks on. So that's a sag. It's just a dip in the voltage for just a couple of 3 cycles, something like that. Swells is where when the air conditioner turns off until the regulator regulates it again, you might get a couple more. But it's not a transient, it's not a big spike, it's just a little bit of over voltage, and it really doesn't cause any problems. So basically what we want to talk about is what do harmonics in these high frequency transients do? First of all, they cause meters, electric meters, to read inaccurately. Now we're not just talking about meters for test equipment, we're talking about your electric meter at your house, induction disc meters. They cause motors and transformers to burn out. They cause neutral wires in a system to overheat. They cause electronic equipment to fail. And of course, they cause problems with human health. In the United States, we use a grounded Y system. Basically, what we have is 3 wires, like hot wires, and we have a neutral wire that takes the current back. The current will oscillate between the 3, and then the imbalance current goes back. So when we have linear loads, like light bulbs and motors, what happens is if you have 20 amps in A, 20 amps in B, 20 amps in C, there's 0 current in the neutral wire. What happens when we switch to nonlinear loads, there's a different formula. And so what happens with the same scenario, with 20 amps in A and 20 amps in B or in C, we would have 42 amps in the neutral. So you see, if we have 30 amp wire up here, the fuses don't blow, nothing, the system works just fine. But with the 42 amps in the neutral, you're overloading the wire. So in the United States, they elected to put the wire in, or the current into the ground, rather than putting up a bigger wire. It's like a sewer system. If your sewage, you flush your toilet, it goes from your house out to the main street, and you have a 2-inch pipe out there, and the 2-inch pipe plugs up. One would normally think, well, I'll just dig up the street and put in a bigger pipe. That would be the most logical way of doing it, or you could put up another pipe. But in the United States, the electric utilities lobbied the government, and they allowed them to put the current in the ground. So that'd be like going out and allowing somebody to dig up the street and drill a hole in the sewage pipe out on the main street. Yes, you'll relieve the pressure, and you won't have sewage backing up in your basement, but you'll have it coming in the front door. So what happens is we have, that's why we call it the stray voltage or something like that, as Duncan mentioned earlier. And I was unaware that Nexus did that. You're kind of before your time, so, about the cows. And so it's not just my opinion. This is a page out of the IEEE, Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And you can see here we have like 50 amps on this line, and this would be 50 amps, and this is 57. So normally we would have 7 amps in the neutral, but here it calculates out to be 82 amps. So you see it's overloads, so it overloads wires in the buildings, it overloads wires out in the distribution system. As a result, with these high frequencies, okay, that are on the lines, it also gets onto the power grid. And now these are poles up in the air, and these lines are going horizontal. So basically what we have is a horizontal antenna. And so people living along power lines become ill. But there's all kinds of research. For every 10 studies you find on research that says people living next to power lines that become ill, get cancers, things like that, you will find 10 studies that says it's inconclusive. Well, there's 2 things that are on there. And the utilities in the studies, mostly when they look at it, only look at the 50 cycle or the 60 cycle part of it. And so you can say, okay, the pole's 90 feet high or 80 feet high, and we have all 137,000 volts on it. So therefore, a 50 cycle sine wave, or the field strength of that thing should only go 50 feet on each side of that pole. And you can take a Gauss meter out there, and you can check it, and sure enough, it does only go that far. Therefore, if you live 60 feet away from the power line, you should be safe. But what they do not measure is the high frequency stuff that's on the line. That can go for miles. Okay, the IEEE 519 came out in 1992 with a document, recommended practice and requirements for harmonic control in electrical systems. Unfortunately, nobody enforces these rules, although it's there. And it says these frequencies can be in the radio frequency range, and as such can induce harmful effects associated with spurious RF, spurious meaning bastard or unwanted. Nonlinear loads, okay, and this is an excerpt from Fortune magazine in 1999. The situation will get worse before it will, we will be able to mitigate it. One reason is that EPRI, Electrical Power Research Institute, expects 70% of all electricity produced within the United States to flow through electronic devices in 2002 versus 30% today. Now, this is 2012, so we know that it's more than 70%. So what are the effects of electrical pollution on electrical equipment? Okay, higher levels of harmonics result in erratic malfunctions of electronic equipment that can have serious consequences. Instruments can be affected, giving erroneous data or otherwise performing unpredictably. One of these, of course, is going to be your electric meter. It's something that everybody has here. So even if you're not in the medical industry or something like that, you're still affected. You still all get a light bill. Most serious of these malfunctions are in medical instruments, and this is from the IEEE 519. So overheating of wires, electrical pollution can cause overheating of electrical wires, resulting in equipment failure and in fires. Okay, the power watt meter, and we're going to come back to this. But this is a power quality manual put out by Ontario Hydro, so the electric utility's own power quality reference manual. And it says that watt-hour meters and overcurrent relays, okay, harmonics generate additional torque on induction disk meters, which can cause improper operation since these devices are only calibrated for accurate operation on the fundamental frequency. In other words, 50 cycle here, 60 cycle in the States, and it causes incorrect readings. So what are the effects of electrical pollution on animals and in humans? Okay, Hillman, Graham, and myself, we did some research back in 98, 99. I started involved in this. They were involved in it before. But we did it on milk production in cows. So there's no placebo effect. What we did is we took some instruments and we bolted plates or grouted plates on the floor, 5 feet apart, the length of a Holstein cow, and we measured the data there. And we plotted it, and we plotted it against daily milk production. Now, the farmer doesn't get paid for milk he doesn't produce. So what we found was, and we used different instruments, and we use different manufacturers of instruments, and we didn't take just one farm. We always took 5 farms minimum in a row, and we did it in different counties in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and we did it several places. And so what happened is the electric utilities would say, okay, your milk went down today, but, you know, or your milk production, but it can't be our fault because it's your management. You don't know how to manage. So we would take 5 farms in a row. What we found is the day one person's milk production went down, everybody's went down. And when the day one went up, everybody's went up. And it was like a yo-yo. And so, but it always correlated with the electrical activity. The lowest correlation we had was 96.5% when we measured the power quality by plugging recording instruments into the electrical outlet on the wall. The highest was 99.9, the R value, and that was because we actually went out into where the cow stands and we bolted or grouted the plates on the floor. And the studies lasted 517 days, and we have over 30,000 cows on film. So it's more than anybody else has done with cows, okay? Now, I didn't want to bring a whole lot of this up with cows because you're probably not too many farmers here. But the idea is that the cows didn't know if there's no placebo effect or anything like that, and it does affect milk production. So what does it do to humans? Milk production, there's a person we wrote scientific papers on it and reported it. A guy named Burchard repeated it in a study, and he found that, he only exposed the cows to this for 2 weeks, and he found there was a 16.39% drop in milk production within 2 weeks, and then he stopped the study. Martin Graham, who's a professor emeritus from UC Berkeley, and I did some research on chicks, on embryos. And so what we did is we took, I don't know how many people here have a Dell laptop computer, and I'm not picking on Dell because there's none of them that are any good, but what we did is we took a Dell laptop computer, because that was a common thing, and a Dell laptop computer will put 25 kilohertz back on the line, back on your line. And so we put these eggs in an incubator, and we exposed some chicks, or the eggs, on the 10th day for 30 minutes to what a Dell laptop computer would put on the line. Now, I wanted to do it more because Martin Graham lives in California, and I live in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's in the upper Midwest, and California is half the country away on the coast. So I didn't like to fly out there each time. So I wanted to make sure we got some results and back off from there. But Martin Graham said, no, we're just 30 minutes, that's enough, we'll see what happens. The chick on the left, you can see it has all these dark burn marks, and it has one leg. It doesn't have a leg on the other side. They all had birth defects if they even hatched. But this one here was the better of them that we could compare with. The foot is underneath there, but there's no leg. The one on the right hadn't been exposed. So you can see it affects embryos. Dr. Yuri Grigoriev, who is a professor of medicine in Moscow and well respected around the world, repeated the study up in Moscow, and he used more eggs and everything. And we again exposed one incubator was a control, another one had 2 of them were exposed to what a Dell laptop computer would put on, only continuously, and we filtered one. The one that was filtered, we got an 81% hatch rate success. The one that was not filtered, but had the dirty electricity applied to it, we only had a 68.5%, and then the control was 79%. So you can see that it's repeatable, the study, you can do it. Now these are the symptoms of radio wave sickness, and you can read them, but I'm going to read headaches, nausea, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, irritability, depression, anxiety, insomnia, fatigue, weakness, tremors, muscle spasms, numbness and tingling, altered reflexes, muscle and joint pain, foot and leg pain, flu-like symptoms, fever. More severe reactions can include seizures, paralysis, psychosis, and stroke, cardiac palpitations, arrhythmias, pain or pressure in the heart, or your chest, low and high blood pressure, slow or fast heart rate, shortness of breath, sinusitis, bronchitis, pneumonia, asthma, skin rash, itching, burning, and facial flushing, pain or burning in the eyes, pressure in or behind the eyes, deteriorating vision, floaters, cataracts, digestive problems, abdominal pain, enlarged thyroid, testicular, ovarian pain, dryness of the lips, tongue, mouth, eyes, great thirst, dehydration, nosebleeds, internal bleeding, altered sugar metabolism, immune abnormalities, redistribution of metals within the body, hair loss, pain in the teeth, deteriorating fillings, impaired sense of smell, ringing in the ears. Now, these are the symptoms of radio wave sickness. Now, what happened is I was working with cows. And these farmers would say, you know, this doesn't just affect cows. Maybe they weren't normal either, but they would say, this affects my wife. My wife goes into the barn and she has heart palpitations. My wife goes into the barn and she passes out. She gets in an ambulance. They ride her down, give her a ride to the hospital. And we live in a rural area, so it's like maybe an hour before you get to the hospital. They get to the hospital, they're fine. They rode on a rubber-tired vehicle for an hour. And so I was in the military, and I got drafted, or I was going to get drafted, so I enlisted, so I got my choice during the Vietnam War. So I worked with radio frequency energy. I worked with transmitters and receivers. So we had classes in radio wave sickness. We knew about these symptoms, but we weren't making weapons or anything at the time. Maybe some other division was, but not me. We were working with communications electronics. And the reason they told us this was because they said, look, if you start to have any symptoms, you need to go and get a meter and find out where it's coming from. Somebody scratched an antenna cable, somebody left one off, something like that. So when these farmers were telling me about their wives having and the kids have rashes, one guy, his son was a diabetic, and he had uncontrolled blood sugar. He goes on a cruise where you can eat all you want, and his blood sugar should have been totally out of control, and it was totally controlled. He comes back to the farm, and it's out of control again. So the question was, okay, when we're exposed to these high frequencies, we normally associated with them being exposed to like somebody living next to a military installation or an airport, and cell towers back in 1998, 99 were not on every block or corner or hill in the country. So what happened was, and I couldn't say anything, so I had to go someplace and find another source, because when I was in the service, this stuff was classified, these symptoms. And so what we found is that they were being exposed to high frequencies, but it was on the building's wires. And why? Because of the electronic equipment. Now you can say, look, those symptoms are really general, and I could go out and sit on a mountaintop and have those symptoms. That's true. But if you move from the mountaintop and they go away, and you come back to that mountaintop, and they come back, every time you come back to that mountaintop, maybe you better look at the mountaintop. Now, and I remember I was in the United States Air Force, so we had these symptoms, or these classes before. The United States Navy, a year or so ago, came out and they released this, and it was in 1971. You can see a document from their research institute, and they got the same symptoms. So there's 2,300 references that they use. You can download the report off the web. And again, Dr. Carl Mara, who was a medical doctor in science, and he was head of the Occupational and Disease and Therapy Center in Prague, Czechoslovakia, wrote a book in 1969, and he published this and translated it into English in 1972, and it's the same symptoms. And there's some more, thyroids, things like that. And one of the things that they did is they put rats in a container, and they exposed the rats to some high frequencies. And nothing happened. And they were sitting around, and these scientists and the rats were fine. So one guy said, well, why don't we pulse the signal? So they pulsed it. And within 3 minutes, all the rats were dead. They didn't even have time to go ahead and make the notes like symptoms, staggering around or whatever. Now, J. Patrick Riley's written a textbook, and the smallest current having an observable effects, heart rhythm disturbances, occurs at 80 microamps in humans. That's 80 millionths of an amp, so it's really not much. Oh, what are we doing here? Okay, there's something called contact current. That would be the current that would be between the sink and the floor, or your counter or something. And the absolute as well as the modest level of contact current, modeled 18 microamps, produces average electric fields in tissue along its path that exceed 1 millivolt per meter. At and above this level, the National Institute of Environmental Health and Sciences Working Group in 1998 accepts that biological effects relevant to cancer have been reported in numerous well-programmed studies. EPRI, Electrical Power Research Institute, has this handbook. the Handbook for the Assessment and Management of Magnetic Fields Caused by Distribution Lines. It was put out in 1995, and it says, furthermore, proximity to distribution lines has been associated with the risk of childhood cancer in 3 epidemiological studies. The book cost $25,000. Now, and you can go on the web and you can get the numbers and, and you can check it out yourself. Now, what happened to me, I got the book, but I didn't pay $25,000 for it. I went to Madison, Wisconsin, that's the capital of Wisconsin, and the Public Service Commission headquarters is there, and they have a library. And so I went into the library and I checked out some books. And this is one of the books I checked out. And I checked it out on a Wednesday. So I stayed in Madison Wednesday, I stayed there Thursday, and Friday I was back at my office. And when I got back to the office on Friday, my bookkeeper came in and said, "What did you get from the Public Service Commission? You have a bill here for $232 for a lost book." Well, I'm supposed to get it for 2 weeks, right? So how can I, what happened here, So what, it crossed my mind I should pack the books up and send them back. But I thought, what's in the book? Maybe I should read it. And of course, about the 3rd page, I get this statement. So then it goes on, it tells me how to fix it. So I said, well, how much is the book new? I mean, we'll go on the web and buy the book new or something. Went on the web and it's $25,000. So it's the most money that I've ever made in one day in my life. I sent them the $232. And you can see their little stamp right here. So we should go in the book business. I know Donna Fisher was here and she wrote several books, so I don't know how many of them are sold for $25,000, but okay. When you talk, so what's in our homes? And we talk about this contact current, and you can see here where we put an oscilloscope and we use a patch and we put it on the sink and we put a patch on the floor and we connected the wires and we get this waveform, and it's a 60-cycle waveform, and this is in Canada. And we're reading 3.48 volts, okay? So if we calculate that out, and if we say the man's 500 ohms of resistance, we're going to get 6,960 microamps. And remember, only 80 microamps will cause, and in contact, it's only 18 microamps. So that's 386 times more current than what EPRI, that's the utility's own research arm, says has an effect that's relevant to cancer. So we take this another little girl here in Canada, I think she's about 10 years old, and we put an EKG patch on her ankles. And we have to use EKG patches because anybody that has anything to do with the medical business, you know that if you touch 2 probes, you'll generate a current because of DC, because of your dissimilar metals, the salt and things in your body. So we use an electrocardiogram as a conductive gel that touches the skin. So this is a true waveform, and you can see what it is here. And that's alternating current, and it's going through her body, up one leg and down the other. And it's 1,600 microamps, or 90 times higher than what's relevant to cancer. And these are papers now that have been published, peer-reviewed journals, Environmental Health Perspectives in 1997, radio frequency exposure for people who live near high voltage lines. The intensity of the RF fields is low, but the intensity of the currents induced in the human body by exposure to magnetic fields increases with frequency. Now, the higher the frequency, the more energy. You've heard of Ohm's law and Kirchhoff's law. Well, there's a guy named Maxwell Planck. He was a German physicist. He said energy is proportionate to frequency. So the higher the frequency, the more energy. That's how microwave ovens work. You put something in your oven, it's 220 volts. In the United States, it's 240 volts, and it draws about 30 amps. And you took a 3-pound roast and you put it in there, and you get this really nice, good roast after 2-3 hours or something. Take the same size roast and put it in a microwave. The microwave's plugged into a 120 volt outlet, so it's half the voltage, and it draws 10 amps of current, so it's 1/3 the current. So put it in there for 3 hours. What do you think that roast looks like when it comes out of that microwave oven after 3 hours? Maybe a hunk of coal or something. So how did it get that way? There's more energy because of the frequency, the high frequencies. In 1998, and probably a lot of you already know this, but Neil Cherry, before that, he was from New Zealand, Lincoln University. He was commissioned by the European Parliament to do a review of the literature that's out there This review cites a great deal of internationally published peer-reviewed scientific evidence from laboratories and universities around the world, sourced from reports from reputable institutions and in internationally published papers from peer-reviewed journals. This shows compelling evidence of a thermobiological changes in cells in animals which relate to brain function change, sleep disruption, chronic fatigue, reproductive problems, and adverse health problems such as immune system impairment and cancers of many organs. Epidemiological studies have identified statistically significant increases of these incidents of most of these symptoms and decreased association with above average exposure to radio frequency and microwave exposure. The safe level of exposure to high frequency is 0, he states, and I believe that. Now, I don't know, I'm sure there's nobody here that hasn't heard of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, ADD, ADHD. No known cause, no known cure. But if you look at the symptoms of radio wave sickness, there's a known cause and a known cure. Cause is exposure to high frequency, the cure is remove the high frequency, or remove you from the high frequency. But they're the exact same symptoms. The EPA, one in 1990 and one again in 1992, came out with 2 reports. They're in draft form. They're still in draft form. I went to Washington, D.C. when I heard about them, and I had to get them. And as Duncan said, I was in the United States military for 4 years. I had a top secret clearance with crypto access. When I got out, I had to sit down and they explained to me if I talk about what I've seen or heard or whatever, you know, I'm going to go to jail and I get 10 years and all this stuff, right? You sign these papers, okay? I had to sign more papers to get these 2 documents than I did when I got out of the service. I'm not supposed to talk about them or what's in them, but I could hand them to somebody else and they could read it. So that's what I basically did. But it causes cancer, it causes miscarriages, it causes all these problems. So why are they still in draft form? The literature's there, it's been there, and this is 1990-92, okay? This is a hygiene clinic and epidemiological analysis of disturbances induced by radio frequency EMF exposure in the human body in 2000. The central nervous system and cardiovascular system pathology level is significantly higher in regulators and in persons previously exposed to EMFs than in the control group. Medical hypothesis by Sam Millam in 2001. The authors conclude that childhood leukemia, peak of common acute lymphoblastic leukemia, is attributed to residential electrification. 75% of childhood acute lymphoblastic leukemia and 60% of all childhood leukemia may be preventable. And this is back in 2001. He also did a study on the electrification of America. The blacks in the South were the last people to get electrified. Diabetes, and when you think about in the United States and you see the movies and you think of these overweight, heavy, black mammies that, they portray, and that's really the way it was in the South quite a bit. Okay, but when 1950s, the electrification came through in the South, and now the black people have just as much chance of getting cancer as anybody else, and they have the same rate of diabetes. Where prior to that, it was like almost unheard of. California Health Department did research, and Raymond Neutra, and the EMFs can cause some degree of risk of childhood leukemia, adult brain cancer, Lou Gehrig's disease, and miscarriage. Now, this report was completed 2 years prior to it being made public, and the taxpayers of the states of California paid for it, but they had to sue. The governor held it up. But in the United States, the number 1 contributor to soft money is the drug companies. This is fact. Number 2 is the electric utilities, and number 3 is the HMOs, or insurance companies. And I had to go to Washington, D.C. to get those papers, those documents. And I'm from Wisconsin. I'm kind of a country bumpkin. And when so I couldn't believe this was going on, and my U.S. senator said, well, it told me who the number 1 contributor to soft money was. And I said, what happened? My mouth got in gear before my brain. I said, what do they do? Sit out here eating yuppie cookies and drinking herbal tea saying, you make them sick and we'll treat them? He said, no. They sit out here drinking bourbon, smoking big cigars, saying you make them sick and you'll treat them. And of course, that's kind of cynical or something, but the longer I stay in this, the more I'm finding that there's I'm not a doctor. I'm an electrical expert. I can find all these documents, and a person who's the head of a health department or a whole country's health system or something, they can't find this literature? They can't read it? I mean, this is not published in the National Enquirer. I mean, this is stuff that's published peer-reviewed medical journals. The Sacramento Bee said that school teachers, and of course they're the ones that got energy efficient lights, the schools did first, and they got computers and things like that, the teachers have a 72% higher rate of endometrial cancer than cancer in women in comparable age and other groups. 59% higher rate of melanoma. I should wear my glasses. Human cancer cells grow at a rate of 1,600% and become more malignant. And this was published in Radiation Biology. There's a couple guys, Phillips and Winters, they did the research in the United States. They were doing it at the request of an electric utility. They got this result. The electric utility shut them down and said, no, we're not going to publish this. So they came to Australia back in the 80s, and they repeated the study and got the same results, and it was published. Radiation Protection and Dosimetry in 2007 said that the results of this study show that transient electric and magnetic fields would induce higher current density in child body than power frequency fields with similar field strength. The IEEE, Institute of Electro and Electronic Engineers, in April 25, 2011, now came out and said harmonic pollution is a growing problem caused by the widespread use of power supplies and other nonlinear loads. It can result in power loss and equipment damage, and may also be related to environmental safety issues. What are the environmental safety issues? Because you read prior to this, it talks about all the equipment and things like that. So of course it's the health, and it's like cover yourself, Blood sugar. Blood sugar is a number. It isn't something that's psychosomatic. If you have a headache and we do something and you say, okay, how's your headache? And it went away, only you knew you had the headache. But if we can take your blood sugar or your pH in your saliva or something that's a number. And so we took this number and we looked at the number on the wall with a meter. And then we changed the number on the wall, and we could change the person's blood sugar. It takes about 20 minutes to 2 hours to acclimate with blood sugar. And we've cleaned up environments where people have taken insulin and they actually get too much, and so they went into started going into insulin shock. But you can see it's a number that can be plotted against a number. So this should be the end of the story. There shouldn't be any more question about this, but still we go on. In Japan, they did some research, and they found that insulin, an extremely low frequency magnetic field, attenuates insulin secretion from the insulinoma cell line. Electromagnetic.health.org. In Switzerland this last year, Dr. Thomas Rau was convinced that electromagnetic loads lead to cancer, concentration problems, ADD, tinnitus, migraines, insomnia, arrhythmia, Parkinson's, and even back pain. Rau also says electrical sensitivities is a serious emerging public health issue globally and a subject in which most doctors have no training. The electronic smog, we did a professor, I shouldn't do that. Professor Magda Havas did some research, and she presented it in Milan, Italy in 2006. And they established a committee, the Health Protection Agency, and they were to report to the British government. And this is the results of the report. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classes the smog, they call it electronic smog, but we're talking about the same thing, as a possible human carcinogen. It is likely to cause up to 30% of all childhood cancers. There's an increase in evidence that the smog causes people to become allergic to electricity, leading to nausea, pain, dizziness, depression, and difficulties in sleeping and concentrating. Both the World Health Organization and HBA accepts that the condition exists, and the UN body estimates that up to 3 in every 100 people are affected by it. I do not agree with that statement. I think everybody's affected by it. If we all took our shirts off and we went out in the sun right now, we would all get sunburned if we stayed out long enough. But not all of us would burn at the same rate. It doesn't affect everybody the same way. And I think some people associate, how they feel with electricity. I was talking to a guy earlier here that was running this technical equipment, and he said he can feel this stuff, and he could before, and he was working on gets by electric trains and things like that. He could tell. So he knows what causes those heart problems in his heart. But other people, they have heart, or they get a headache, so they take a pill, aspirin or something. But I think it's more than that. Indivisible smog created by electricity that powers our civilization is giving children cancer, causing miscarriages and suicides, and making people allergic to modern day life. The number one cause in death in electric workers, utility workers, linemen in the United States is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The second is suicide. So what's on the wires inside the buildings in our house? Okay, this is a waveform. This is one cycle. We blew it up. This is 60 cycle here. This person here, I was called in by the United States Senator, sent me to this person's house. She'd complained to different people. And what happened is her husband was bleeding out of the mouth, rectum, eyes, things, and he had a certain kind of cancer, a rare cancer. And this town is less than 300 people, and 5 people in the town all got it at the same time. They're all dead. They died. But so I went and measured her house. And the State Public Service Commission came there, and they did their test. And what they did is they said, we found the problem. You're right, it is electricity. And we found the problem. It's your ice maker in your refrigerator. And so, of course, you know, these are electrical engineers. These are people, but they're also politicians, okay? They take their orders from them. But so the lady said, okay, and there was quite an audience there. She had her priest there, and she had kind of a support group and her neighbors, and of course the people whose husbands who were also either dead or dying from the same thing were there. And she said, really? That's my ice maker and my refrigerator. You know, you open your refrigerator door, you have this ice maker in there. So she said, well, please, can you show me where it is? They opened the freezer, and there's no ice maker. So they packed up their little bags and go. Of course, then she writes to her U.S. Senator, and I came and measured it. And you can see, we take out the 60 cycle. The first trace is the 60 cycle, the blue. But if you look at it really close, you can see a little jiggly up here and a little jiggly down here. When current flows in a direction, it builds a field. When it stops, the field collapses and induces current into whatever's next to it. But if the current doesn't flow in a linear fashion, it goes up and it stops, and it goes down. Like going up 2 steps and coming down 1, going up 2, come down 1. You'll get to the top of the steps, but you've burned up a whole lot more energy. And you can't see it so good here. So what we did, we said, let's put a filter in there and take out the 60 cycle and see what's left over. It's like going to Mexico, and you get a glass of water and you get sick. So we do research on water. And the Center for Disease and Control in the States is in Atlanta, Georgia. So Atlanta, Georgia takes and goes to the tap, and they draw a glass of water, and they test it, and they say, yeah, you can't get sick from water. So every 10 studies you find that says people get sick from water, you'll find 10 studies that says that they don't. But maybe it's not the water. It's the bacteria in the water that's making you sick. This is what makes you sick. We took out the 60 cycle, and you can see this high frequency stuff. See, this is 1/60th of a second from here to here. Look at how many times that field built and collapsed here in 1/60th of a second. So it increases that frequency. And remember, anything above 1.7 kilohertz dissipates internal to the human body. This one here is out of a person's house, and her daughter's diabetic. Now this is a light dimmer switch. I don't know how many people got light dimmer switches, but you see this big spike here and a little one here. And they can demonstrate that back there later at this electric-clean booth. But what a light dimmer switch does, they're really bad. So, you know, I always tell people, take out the dimmer switches. And, well, I like the mood. Well, then change the light bulb. Well, but I really like the mood. Then light a candle, you know. This is just a slide I put in so you can see the 60 cycles flowing here. And you can see this like hair or something. That's like the dirty power. That's what we're talking about. This stuff rides on top of the 60 cycle. Comes into your house, or you create it in your house. Macintosh PowerBook, okay? We'll do this current spectrum of that. And you can see the voltage waveform here. And this is the current. So then we do a frequency spectrum of it. And you can see all the electrons are moving at 50 cycle here. Then it comes down, but you see where this arrow is here? Anything above this, all this here, is going internal. And you say, well, it isn't so much. Yeah, it is. It's quite a bit. Because it's high frequency, and it's going internal. This is a Dell laptop computer. And you can see how choppy that current waveform is. And you can see this is all this here blew out to here. That's all going internal. It isn't much, but it doesn't take much. Remember, only 18 microamps. This is a flat screen TV. And you can see this number. We'll talk about that meter, but it's reading 284 on that meter. And this is the current. See, it's drawing it in short pulses. It's an energy efficient TV, right? And the flat screens are nice because, before we worried about the old cathode ray tubes, and the stuff was coming right up through space. And, your mom said when you were little, don't sit so close to the TV. Well, his mother's intuition, she didn't have $5,000 oscilloscopes to measure it with, but she knew you shouldn't sit so close to the TV. Or here, flat screens now, they don't put out anything through the front, LCDs, things like that. But you can still see what's on the wires. And all this here is above 1.7 kilohertz, going internal. There's some other devices out, body mats, earthing mats. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of those. And it's supposed to discharge you, and you hook them to the ground plug on the wire. So I took between the mat, I took you can see the oscilloscope here, and I took where you connect on here, and this wire here would go to the ground, the plug. In the United States, 70% of all the current that goes out on the phase conductors returns via the earth, okay? So you would never think about walking out and taking a wire and climbing up the electrical pole and clipping a wire onto the bottom wire and then bring it in and connect it to the mat here. So this is what you'll be exposed to, this voltage here, and it's a high frequency, and you can see the energy. This is HID lighting. It's the, we don't have it in here, but you've been into, I think you have Walmarts or something over here, but bigger industrial warehouses or stores or something, big box stores, will have these lights. And this is the waveform. And you can see there's quite a bit of stuff out beyond here. So if you're going to the store and you're going shopping, you get a headache, feel good, you get depressed, maybe. This is a light dimmer switch. And you can see how it chops the sine wave. Makes it really rough. And so you see, and the bad part about this is that if you're upstairs in the bedroom and you're sleeping, and your wife or your son or something is down in the living room and he's got that dimmer switch on, you're being exposed to this in your bed sleeping. I mean, you don't have to be in the same room. It gets on every wire in the whole house. Now, if you share a transformer, okay, with a neighbor, because in the States we have like maybe 8 houses or something in a city on one transformer. You can vary your dimmer switch and take a meter and go to the neighbor's house and vary your dimmer switch, and you can see it at the neighbor's. This is a compact fluorescent light, okay? It's the most dangerous thing that's come out this decade. I've done research with Trent University out of Peterborough, Canada. We tested 76 light bulbs, 76 different brands. They all put between 50 kilohertz and 100 kilohertz back on the line. But the bad part, and we can put a filter in there and take that out, yes, but it also radiates through space. You see here, this line here, anything above there, all this is going internal to the human body. And that's what's on the wire. What's coming through space, that's the same thing, okay? I mean, it's the same frequency. Between 50 and 100 kilohertz, the most biologically active frequencies. The most dangerous frequencies is between 4 kilohertz and 100 kilohertz. I went to Russia. I've worked with the Russian health department. The Russians, and you can look it up, Project Pandora, in 1960s, during the Cold War, pulsed the United States Embassy. They gave the ambassador leukemia. When he got leukemia, he came back to the States. They sent another ambassador over. Within 6 months, he had leukemia. So then they started investigating it. They found that the United States Embassy was being pulsed. Now, people think, okay, They pulsed it, and you got this vision of, they got this satellite dish that they're aiming over at the building. But these buildings, when they build them, they got lead in the walls, they got all kinds of, so they can have secure conversations and that. So how did you get that signal inside? They're shielded and everything. But they put it on the building's wires, it goes right in. So anyway, when the second ambassador got leukemia within 6 months, the Russians actually know what frequencies will give you what. And they're the most dangerous and most biologically active frequencies, and they gave me the information. And now, since then, World Health Organization said that too, but it's between 4 kilohertz and 100 kilohertz, okay? But these compact fluorescent lights, this is a waveform here. And you can see the blue. This is what's coming through space. Once on the line, and the red is what's coming through space. Now we plug the filter in, and you can see the blue, and you can see this area right here. It's so close together, and frequency is equal to 1 over time, so the closer they are together, the higher the frequency, okay, the more energy. So now when you look at the blue will clean up with filters, but it didn't do anything for what's coming through space. Now it's been reported in England when, they said you got to get rid of these, we're taking the incandescents away, that people who were prone to seizures, in other words, people who had epilepsy or something like that, they would have such severe seizures, it would set off the seizure and have such severe seizures that they would actually have a fit. People who weren't prone to seizures could have seizures. Headaches, migraines, everything went up. So it is the most dangerous thing that's come out this decade. You can see here, and again, anything above this line here is all going internal. Now, I need to spend a little bit of time on this slide. Remember that slide before where we said it causes incorrect readings in your light bill? Now, the electric utilities in the United States, and I don't know about here, but they actually come out and they gave us light bulbs. Now, what is the electric utilities' primary purpose? To make money. Their primary purpose is to sell kilowatts. So if you're going to sell less kilowatts, if you own a candy store, why would you give people something that would make them eat less candy? You see? But now, if you can go ahead, remember, they're in the business of selling kilowatts. And they gave you these light bulbs to save energy. But then they should be shooting themselves in the foot, right? So why? You have to ask yourself this. So now, look, you remember the handbook here, the quote? It's from an electric utility. So it isn't like, oh, we made a mistake, we didn't know about it. They're the ones that published the book. It's in every electrical engineering handbook you pick up. They are supposed to save energy. Yes, they save energy, but they cause your meter to read inaccurately. So how did they lose money? How would you like to have a gas station where somebody comes in with a 20-gallon tank and they put 30 gallons of gas in their car all the time, and you charge them for 30 gallons? Or the butcher who sells you 2 pounds of hamburger, and he gets home and it's really only a pound and a half, but you paid for 2 pounds. Now that should answer some questions. Why did they give them to you? They cause induction disk meters to read inaccurately. Wind turbines, okay? Wind turbines put a tremendous amount of dirty power back on the line. Why? Because when the wind's blowing 5 miles an hour, we want to produce electricity. When the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour, we want to produce electricity. And forgive me for talking miles per hour, but instead of kilometers, but it doesn't matter, okay? But what happens is when the wind's blowing, when the propeller's turning 5 miles an hour, we create DC current. The current, we're always going to create current, so we can charge this big battery bank up. And so then current can always be put back online, because then they take the batteries and they change it back into AC current. So we have an inverter there, okay? And so it traps up the line. So this is some waveforms here. This is on the power grid, primary neutral on the power grid. Primary neutral to remote ground rod, and wind turbines were installed and running, okay? You see the difference? This is before they were running. This is after. You see, it's still not good, but now look at when the wind turbines are running. It puts all kinds of high frequency back on the wires. It'll come right into your house. And it isn't like, well, I'm 3 blocks from a wind turbine. It's going to put it on the whole, puts it on a whole grid. This is another residence. And this is between the sink and the floor. So how many ever wash dishes here? How many don't wash dishes? Okay? And you're lying if you're a husband and if you say you don't. So you can see this. This is going through your body. Another resident. Sink to floor. And the power to the house is turned off. Solar, another issue. Again, we're charging battery banks, inverters. The inverters chop it up. No inverter, inverter. So what's in our schools? This is 12.5 kilohertz. Remember anything 1.7 goes internal? Then we wonder why our kids have ADD, ADHD, things like that. Another school, this is 25 kilohertz at a school in Elgin, Minnesota. The teacher in this room died of brain tumors. The person in the room next to her died of leukemia. The Melrose Medoro School, 37 kids had asthma. 2 people were diagnosed with MS. It's a small school. They spent $500,000 trying to solve the problem, and they said it was mold. They kept cleaning mold. Finally, the teachers union filed a lawsuit against them. And so basically, this is electromagnetic spectrum, and I put it up there. And this 25 kilohertz that the 2 teachers died, it's over here. So if you can see, you got like AM radio, but you're starting to get X-ray, gamma ray, all this, the non-ionizing current range. And 25 kilohertz is right here. So when we say, well, it's like being in a microwave on low power, micro means small. It kind of is the truth, and nobody would think about putting their kids in a microwave on low power. The Russians have standards. In the 1.7 kilohertz, they rounded it to 2, okay? So they say you're allowed 25 volts per meter of exposure on the electric field and 250 nanotesla on the magnetic field. Up to, but not including 2 kilohertz. If you go above 2 kilohertz, you're only allowed 2.5 volts per meter and 25 nanotesla. And you can measure, we have this Russian beanie meter. Now, the person working at a computer, they'll actually charge up. You will actually charge and you hold the charge, okay? And that's where we get this current. And so we can measure this, and we had this young woman, and we put this beanie meter, and held it away from her. And this is a Russian physicist, and you can see she's reading like 10 volts per meter. So they said, okay, let's move your legs just a little bit farther apart, because then that would increase the potential, and theoretically more current should be able to go through her body. And that's what happened, and it goes up to 14 volts per meter. So all this energy dissipates internal to the human body. Okay, so research. Myself, Professor Martin Graham, and just a little bit about Martin Graham. He's 85 years old now. He's a professor emeritus from UC Berkeley. He has 40-some patents to his name. He developed and designed the guidance system for the Russian ICBM system when he was at Brookhaven Institute years ago. He's high-speed data. He has sold patents to like Ethernet, things like that. Their equipment won't work without him. So he's an absolute genius when it comes to electrical. So we've done research, and I think it was covered earlier. We made some films and documentaries, and we have over 30,000 cows on film reacting to this. Professor Magda Havis from Trent University has done research, and she presented it around the world on electromagnetic radiation and solutions. And she's presented her research at schools. She's done research on diabetes, multiple sclerosis, tinnitus, and pain, healthy individuals. So that's all the doom and gloom, okay? So now, solution, okay? So the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers says, okay, there's a solution. You should install filters to control these harmonics, okay? So filters is not a novel idea. It's been around since the beginning of radio when we use capacitors and things like that to get out the noise, okay? There's industrial filters that you can buy, and when we first started doing this, we thought, to filter this stuff out, we wanted to, and of course now we want to find out which frequencies are the most biologically active, so I had to go to Russia to find out, and it took a long time, and only when I showed them what was on their building's wires did they become that interested in helping me find out because they were affected too. But you can buy these filters and you can put them on your main. They're kind of pricey, but most of them don't start to take out anything until it's 100 kilohertz and above. But remember, the most biologically active ones are between 4 and 100, so there was nothing available, and we didn't want to have a product to sell because it took away from our credibility as experts. So there are filters out there, but they're not. You need to know the frequency range of that filter. Before you buy a filter, you need to know the frequency range. If it is not taking out between 4 and 100, forget it. And like I said, those lights, compact fluorescent lights, they put between 50 and 100 kilohertz back in the line. Dell laptop, this computer right here is putting 12.5 kilohertz back on the line. So the World Health Organization, here's again, the World Health Organization says acute biological effects have been established for exposure to extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields and in frequency range up to 100 kilohertz that may have adverse consequences on health. Therefore, exposure limits are needed. International guidelines exist that have addressed this issue. Compliance with these guidelines provides adequate protections for acute effects, but nobody enforces these guidelines. The Japanese government reports that 4 to 100 kilohertz are the most biologically active frequencies. So we came out with this filter. This is an Australian model, the Graham-Stetzer filter. We made it. It starts working at 2 kilohertz. It quits about 150 kilohertz. One of the things that you need to know about filters, we did some research with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we did 20 people who had chronic fatigue. And we put filters on at the main panel, okay? And 10 people got miraculously better, 7 people improved, and 3 people couldn't tell the difference if it was on or off. And it was a double-blind study. So what happened, we went back and we took the waveform at the kitchen sink because, just as a reference point. And when we put the filters on, there was really little change. What happened was the people who felt a little bit, who got better, didn't spend a lot of time at home. They went out when the filters were on, they felt good. But the people who were the sickest had a lot of electronic equipment because they weren't bedridden, but they were kind of home-ridden. And so they bought plasma TVs because if you have to watch TV, you might as well watch a good one, right? And so there's 2 sources of this stuff. One is from what's out on the grid, and the other is from what's in your house, okay? So if you put one on the main panel, and I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, well, just put one filter on at the main panel and it'll take care of everything. No, it doesn't, because that's what we did and we tried it. It'll take care of stuff that's coming in off the grid, yes. But will it take care of what's in your house? Not until it gets to the main panel. So until it gets to the main panel, this 12.5 kilohertz that I'm using on this MacBook here is everywhere in the house, in the bedroom when you're sleeping, and I'm down in my basement working on this, okay? So we had to, and we found this out, okay? So it isn't like we just cobbled up this filter and said, here's a product. This is like the best way, and we've got miraculous results and things, and we're gonna talk about that, but you need to have it close to the source. Now, if you can put it by the main panel, that's great. A couple of these or something, you get the same thing. Okay, remember that power quality handbook? It says install filters. So again, it's not a novel idea. It's something that in electrical business, anybody there should know that, but it was just the idea of picking the right filters. One of the other things we had to do is develop a meter. We use an oscilloscope. You've seen these traces so far. I've been an oscilloscope. They're like $5,000, and so we wanted to make a meter. And when we were in Russia, the Republic of Kazakhstan, their health department seen this, and they said, oh my God, this is terrible. But we can't buy $5,000 oscilloscopes for all our sanitary stations or health department offices. Can you make us a meter that will measure the amount of high-frequency energy that's on the building's wires? Well, I can't, but Martin Graham probably can, and he did, and we have the patents on it. And so anybody that's measuring dirty electricity, and this is a standard number now, that, it's our meter. It better be our meter or else it's a knockoff. But they came out, and they seen how bad it was, and they said, look, the number on this meter, they did some research with it, and about 50 on the meter is usually about 2 kilohertz. So they have a national decree that says that if you are in a public building and that number is above 50, you have to take immediate steps to reduce it. Professor Sam Millam did some research with, and he was a professor of medicine, head of the health department in California, or Washington State. Him and Lloyd Morgan did some research at schools. And if you're in a school and the number, or a workplace, and the number's above 2,000, and you're there for more 6 hours a day for 180 days a year, and the reason 180 is that's our teacher contract in schools, you've increased your chances of getting cancer by 25%. If you're in there and it's above 1,000, you've increased your chances of getting cancer by 15%. The Canadian Human Rights Commission came out, and they're not supposed to endorse any products, but they said Graham Stetzer filters can be plugged into outlets to remove high frequencies from the power lines. Improvements are reported for several health conditions, outcomes including multiple sclerosis, behavioral problems, asthma in children in schools, and diabetes. The Journal of Royal Institute of Public Health, microsurge assessment, and we call it microsurge meter in the microsurge, okay, assessment in the patient's bedroom revealed power surges reaching 1,600 GS units, safe levels reported less than 30 Graham Stetzer units. Filtration of dirty electricity reduced levels to under 30 GS units, and the patient noticed dramatic and consistent improvement in sleep patterns within 1 week. Science for total environment, improving power quality with GS filters is accompanied with enhanced teacher well-being, improved student behavior in middle and elementary school, resulting in better and overall learning experience. This is a person here, again, a physicist, and there's no filter here. There's a receptacle here, and she's standing in front of the receptacle about, so far away, and she's reading 3 volts per meter. You plug the filter in, and it went to 2, and then it went to 1, so she discharges. So it does have an effect on people out in the middle of the room. Here's some filtered homes. You can see the difference. This is the dirty power. It cleans it up. Real high dirty power, it cleans it up. So you can see this filtered schools. This is the Tokyo School of the Arts. And you can see the difference. So it's still there, but it's not going internal. This is a school, and we put them in. 37 kids had asthma. 37 kids no longer use inhalers, and they took it right back to the day that the filters were installed. People had MS. 2 people were diagnosed with it and went away. Remember those spikes that we talked about earlier? That's what we're actually taking out. One school budgeted $90,000 a year for equipment repair, and they haven't spent more than $4,000 a year since then. Filtered schools. Symptoms, there's been research done in schools. Now, one thing I should tell you, we have patents all over the world on this thing, but there's always people who are trying to make knockoffs to make a buck. But there's absolutely no research done on their filters, and I'm not sitting up here trying to cry my milk, but we know that we have 24 to 100 kilohertz that we have to take out. So if you just take a capacitor across the line, you're going to see some reduction. But are you going to take out the 4 to 100 kilohertz? That's what we need to take out. So, but the research has all been done on, I know of no other filters that research has been done on except ours. And in schools, 55% of the teachers improved. Teachers were less frustrated, less tired, less irritable. They were better able to focus and had a better health, improved mood, greater sense of accomplishment. The one school we put them in paid for themselves in less than a year because teachers weren't absent. Professor Havis has done a lot of research on them. She's presented her papers in Greece, London, Prague, Italy. Trent University had a news release that poor power quality may be contributed to electrical hypersensitivity. The study in Japan, they took 3 people and they took their blood sugar. One was a type 1 diabetic, one was type 2, and one was a non-diabetic. They fed them exactly the same food in an unfiltered environment. The type 1, the sugar shot up. She had to give herself a shot of insulin. Type 2, it went up, stayed up for quite a while and come down slow. The non-diabetic went up, stayed up, but not as long, didn't go up as high and came down. Then they put, when their blood sugars were back to where they originally started, they put filters in the room, fed them the exact same thing. They weighed it on a digital scale. The type 1 diabetic didn't take any insulin. There was enough left in her system. The type 2 went up, didn't go up as high, didn't stay up as long, and came down sharper. The type non-diabetic had almost, you could overlay it with the type 2. So either the type 2 doesn't have diabetes or the non-diabetic really has type 2. And they did the research with our filters. So it's been not just in the United States, but Canada, all over. This is a person who had MS, okay? The guy on the left, he's 27 years old. His name was Brad. He was a legal assistant, and he kept falling over at work. So they thought he was drunk. But he wasn't. And so then he thought, well, he's on drugs, so they gave him a random drug testing, and he passed that. So basically, they fired him. So he had to go home and live with his parents. You can see that on the wall here, he has a rail. He hangs on the furniture when he walks, and he has to have rails and stuff. And he's walking kind of like he's drunk, okay? So he's part of a study here. These films are from Professor Magda Havis' research. And so they put the filters in, and so she had to come back and ask him these health questions. And this is like 4 days later. Now, he went back to work, but he got sick again. So he had to put filters in the workplace. He's fine. He's working now. Goes to the pub, drinks a beer. He goes to stores, places like that. But what he does is he has his list made up. So he goes in and he gets out right away. This lady here was part of a study. And you can see her hands. This is real time. We can't show their face. And she's sitting in this chair, and she's dribbling indivisible basketballs. Okay? So she's in part of the study, or she's in the study. So 12 days after she has the filters in, Professor Havis goes over to get some health questions. And we have dummy filters, so she has to replace them with dummies. Okay? This is her hands in 12 days. Her husband said, you're not taking the filters. She's going to be out of the study. He said, I'm getting my wife back. She now cooks. She leads a normal life, I guess, from what I understand. She called me and thanked me and things like that. So I don't know her. I never met her. But she had to go out of the study because her results were so dramatic that he wouldn't change them. This is, I think you can see it. This is a person who had MS. This is a MRI. And you can see this lesions here. These are lesions on the brain. And I think it's probably within 2 years after the filters were installed, the lesions actually go away and are reduced. And it usually takes about 1.5 years or so on these people that, it's not the only one that we have these of. Donna Fisher's written a book called More Silent Fields, probably most of you know. And a lot of this information's in there. This is a very informative book. Professor Sam Millam wrote a book called Dirty Electricity. And he's saying that all this stuff could be prevented, things like that. Now, again, I want to just touch a little bit on knockoffs, because there's a lot of people making knockoffs, okay? And remember going back to how much money, power it costs? There's people that can go around and say, okay, here's an electric motor or something, or some sort of load, and it's usually an inductive load. It won't work on a light bulb. Say, okay, by plugging my device in, you can see the current go down. And therefore you're saving energy. You don't save energy. These things will not save energy. You can put our filters in and you won't save any energy. Your light bill won't go up, probably go down, but not because you're saving energy. It's because you've cleaned up the dirty electricity, those things that are causing the meter to spin faster. The high frequencies cause it. You need to look at the formula for power. We measure power, electrical power, in watts or kilowatts. We get kilowatts, okay? The formula is the current times the voltage times the power factor. Now, if you take an amp meter and you hook it on a motor or some sort of electric motor load, for example, and you're running it and it says, okay, we have 120 volts and we have 10 amps of current. Now we plug this filter or device in and it goes down to 5 amps. So you think, oh, I'm going to save 50% on my light bill. No, you're not, because you increased the power factor. We leave that part out if we want to, show you something. I have an electrical engineering handbook in my pocket. It's the current times the voltage times the power factor. So if you're saying 10 times 10 times 10 is equal to 30, we can say 10 times 5 times, but if we raise it up, the other number, we still get 30. You don't save a nickel. They won't cost you any money to plug these in. They draw reactive power. You don't pay for reactive power, but it changes the power factor. Will your light bill go down? Most likely. But what if your meter isn't reading inaccurately in the first place? Then it won't go down a nickel. But we didn't do it for that. We developed it for health. It's there. So the solution to this problem requires a cooperative effort, in my opinion. Electronic manufacturers need to install tune filters in their devices. This thing puts 12.5 kilohertz back on the line. Remember that Dell computer? Even the compact fluorescent lights can be fixed. Not the mercury part, but you can still put a shield over it, and you can put a tune filter in the base, because you know what you're putting on. If you know it's 50 kilohertz, you can make a tune filter for 50 kilohertz. So consumers need to reduce the amount of effort they're putting on the electrical wires. We're the ones who created it. I mean, it's our house. It's not coming from somebody else bombarding us. So we need to cut it down, so we can do it by putting filters in our electronic equipment, not buying compact fluorescent lights. Buy LEDs or something. It costs you a little more money. I know incandescent is going out in most places. There's hardly anybody who even makes them anymore. So try to go to LEDs. They cost a little more money, but you'll be safer and much better. And they're getting the light fixed up. It used to be like LEDs. It was like looking through a smoke-filled room. So the questions: can we enjoy the benefits of electricity? Can we use it safely? Is technology available to accomplish this? Can we achieve it with minimum expense? It's my opinion. Now, I've prepared this slide here because I did do a little research on Nexus people, and I don't know, we're not normal, so maybe it does fit, but great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. And that was Albert Einstein. So I thought that was appropriate, but I don't know. Now I got this thing here. One thing that I'm going to do here, can you guys switch that over now? I just wanted to show you what's on the building's wires here, right now in this room. And so we have another setup here. I got it on the monitor here. What was the GS numbers now, and what were they before? Can we have that? Okay, 1,600 GS units before, and what'd you say, 150 now. And it's still too high, but we have one filter in, everything here, and we have a lot of electronic equipment here. So you can see that they work. There's no trickery involved, anything like that. The meter works, and the GS unit isn't something I came up with. When we measure electrical energy, it's measured in watts or joules or like that. But this is not a watt, and it's not a joule, and we had a meeting with some physicists and from all over the world came in San Francisco quite a few years ago now, and they said, well, we have to have a name for it, but it's not a watt, it's not a joule, what is it, So one little engineer from China got up and said, why don't we call it a GS unit after the founders, Graham Stetzer. Ohms, they call it ohms and stuff, so that's how it ended up being called a GS unit, but it is an actual measurement of energy. Okay? I think I'm out of time, or very close, and you've been a great audience, regardless of what Duncan said about you. I think you're okay. He'll never let me forget that.
Thanks, David.